preliminary procedure involves mapping of the vein to be treated with ultrasound and to outline the best point to enter the vein with the appropriate access gear to commence the procedure. Having decided the appropriate point of entry, a local anaesthetic is introduced over the vein to be accessed. The next part of the procedure is to make a small incision to admit the access gear. Following this, a needle is introduced into the vein. The access needle is then introduced through the area that has been anaesthetised, and confirmation of the access occurs when blood comes back through the needle itself. This is followed by introduction of a guiding wire which will stabilize the access point so that a sheath can be introduced. All of this, as you can see, is done with ultrasound guidance, the imaging confirming access of the vein with the wire. You can follow here the introduction of the access sheath into the vessel. At this point, the guiding catheter is then introduced through the sheath into the vein, and it is tracked with ultrasound up to the origin of the vein to be treated. Once the origin is seen, the catheter is located accurately within the vessel lumen. Local anaesthetic is now introduced along the course of the vein, using ultrasound to guide the introduction of same for accurate localization around the vein to be treated. This means that when the laser applies heat to the vein, it produces no discomfort for the patient. The fibre optic cable is now taken out of its sterile packaging and introduced into the previously placed catheter. Once the fibre optic cable has been introduced into the catheter and is clear of the tip, the laser is then actuated and the lasering process is monitored by means of ultrasound. On the background image here you can see the tip of the laser fibre on the screen of the ultrasound. As the laser is activated, you can then see the actual vaporization of the vessel lining occurring in the form of bubbles occurring within the vessel lumen. This is tracked down the vein with ultrasound so that the correct amount of power is delivered to each segment of the vein, and this caters for veins of varying diameter. If you look at the screen, you can see the tip of the laser and the vaporization of the vessel contents occurring at the tip of the catheter and fibre itself. This results in accurate delivery of the minimum amount of thermal energy to obliterate the vein. confirmation of obliteration, the excess sheath is then withdrawn from the vein and the area dressed. With tape and a cotton wool button. This completes the laser ablation component of the procedure on the right limb, and attention can then be turned to the opposite limb for the same procedure to be undertaken. Similar localization on the opposite limb is then performed to allow access with a similar access sheath. As you can see, the access needle with the wire guide extrudes from the vein at the access point. Once again, the access sheath slides over the wire guide into the vein to be treated. Confirmation of acquisition of the vessel lumen occurs with ultrasound. This is followed once again by introduction of the guiding catheter into the vein, which is tracked up to the junction of the vein where the leakage occurs. This demonstrates the access catheter being guided by a guide wire to acquire the full length of the vein. As you can see, the catheter slides up over the wire, is tracked by the ultrasonographer to the groin, which is the most common site of leakage for varicose veins. In this case, the actual junction is now going to be ligated by the introduction of an occlusion coil at the junction itself. One can see on the screen the wires across the junction of the leaking vein to the main vein at the groin. One can see on the screen the placement of the occluding ligation coil occurring within the vessel lumen, which you can see by the white shadows on the black background, indicating accurate sealing of the junction. Once again, local anesthetic is introduced along the course of the catheter to protect both the adjacent nerves and to make the procedure painless, as the heat from the laser would otherwise be quite uncomfortable. Once again, the laser fibre is withdrawn slowly down the vein, the correct amount of energy being delivered to the vein by viewing the ultrasound image at the same time. This enables accurate obliteration of the appropriate vessel. Once again, on completion of this procedure, the entry port is sealed with the appropriate dressing. The vein confirmed to be satisfactorily obliterated under ultrasound. In the background, the laser device can now be deactivated for safety, as the laser ablation component of the procedure has been completed. The next component of the procedure is to now sclerose the varicose veins associated with the obliterated main trunk. These are cannulated under ultrasound guidance with a needle, as you can see on the screen, and foamed sclerosant is then introduced into the vessel under ultrasound guidance. Each remaining varix is then treated by this means to introduce the appropriate sclerosing foam into the vessel. and complete the removal of all of the affected varices. The ultrasound imaging here shows how the needle is introduced under direct ultrasound guidance, and you can see the needle approach the varicose vein, enter the lumen, and then the appropriate foam sclerosant is introduced into the vessel, which spreads to the remaining draining varices, as you can see by the white foam percolating through the varicose veins on the imaging.